Welcome to Estonia, a land in the Baltics that really culturally and climate-wise belongs in Scandinavia. A land of long, dark winters and brief, fleeting summers. A land of churches, beautiful churches, some of them really, really ancient. But that's not what Estonia is being talked about recently. After a series of polls taken in Estonia, European newspaper headlines were full of two somewhat surprising discoveries. Estonia seemed to reject Christianity more than any other European state, which is itself a pretty high bar, and at the same time had an extremely high regard for their own pre-Christian animistic religion they call Mausk.
So, is Estonia going pagan? Probably not. That's the short answer. But there is definitely something going on.
So what to make of that? Estonia is modern and proud of it. But their efforts to retain their past heritage is obvious. So many buildings in Tallinn are protected as national heritage that you get these wild modern buildings growing like mushrooms out of historic stone structures.
It's not just buildings they're trying to protect. How about sacred springs and sacrificial stones and sacred groves? So, sacred springs, groves, and sacred stones are all over Estonia. Um, perhaps you could be in Tallinn and not know about them if you're in the city, but once you leave the city, they're just everywhere. And it makes you wonder how many exactly are there in Estonia?
The potential number is in the thousands, but that would include sites that are known to a single family. But I guess 1,000 sites that are common to a larger group, which means like a small village.
1,000 sites? Probably. Take a look at this software put out by the Ministry of Culture. It starts you off with a map of the entire country of Estonia with Tallinn up here in the north. But if you just zoom in somewhere, you find that you will get a closer look. As soon as you start seeing these little icons where it looks like an X from the distance, but it's showing a culture site. Now look at this, Ovrikivi, that means a sacrificial stone. Kultusikivi, sacred stone. Vardi Muisa, well, Muisa is the German manor. But look where we are. This is a 500 meters here. We're down pretty close. And sacred stone, sacrificial stone. They're all over the place. Look up here. Here's a stone graveyard. It's probably historic, maybe prehistoric. This is a sacrificial stone. This is a sacred stone, sacred stone, sacred stone, sacred stone, sacred stone. Wow, they're just everywhere.
So, how does that compare to, for example, Germany and France? Did they have tons and tons of sacred sites all over the country? Maybe they did at one time, but I highly doubt there was anybody in the 1930s that was going from village to village, gathering information from the locals about all the local sacred sites that they had, all the local sacred stones and groves. But that's exactly what they were doing in Estonia.
There are still places where the old village structure, both the topographical structure and functional structure of how land is used, where that persists, and where that has been very conservative for like centuries. You have a field here, and you have a sacred site here, and that goes back several hundred years. And they do persist in some parts of Estonia until today.
I find it fascinating here that Oit is referencing these pagans in these villages as being conservative or traditional. You would never hear terms like that used for pagans in North America or Western Europe. I guess that's a difference between people that are reinventing an old religion and people that are handing it from generation to generation.
And you can recognize a traditional village, and if there are inhabitants there who still live there and whose children do live there, then there is a good chance that you might get uh, some stories that have not yet been recorded. Mm-hmm. And that is actually being done even in this decade.
So why did it survive so well in Estonia, and why do the local Estonians look on it with so much pride? I think for that you have to look at Estonian history. So here I am, standing out in a field about 20 kilometers from Tallinn with the big stone. Where did this stone come from? I mean, there is nothing around. There's absolutely nothing. Well, there's this beautiful chapel, but there's no mountains. There's no place where a stone can come from. Well, where this stone came from was a glacier. So as the glacier was melting off, they would be dumping the stones. And this all happened at the end of the last ice age. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is, what kind of people would say, oh, let's go out way the heck up there to where those glaciers are melting and where nothing has ever lived for thousands of years, and let's settle up there and make that into our home? Who the heck does that? Probably people that are just sick of other people. All the yakety yak, all the borrowing stuff from you and never returning it, all the different problems that you get with other people. I think these were people that just wanted to get away. And now, 12 millennia later, you get all the tourists coming in, and they're probably, oh my God, we froze for 11 millennia for this? Okay, I really don't want to be sued by the Ministry of Tourism, but I'm just trying to make the point that this really was the end of the world when the Estonian tribes moved up here. In fact, the ancient Romans talked about Thule, a mythical island at the end of the inhabitable world, and there are several islands which are argued to be the origins of the myth. One of them is the island of Saaremaa, the largest island of Estonia. And even though they're so far isolated way up here north, the agricultural age and the Iron Age was not particularly delayed. Delayed a little bit, but the Viking Age even seemed to have arrived here early. The Viking Age is considered to have begun in 793 with the Viking raid on the English island of Lindisfarne. On Saaremaa, the largest island of Estonia, one of the largest Viking burials dates back another 50 to 100 years before that. Frustratingly, there is little recorded from the Estonian side, but the Swedish, Icelandic, and Danish Vikings were well aware of the Eastern Vikings from what they called Estland, and there were plenty raids and counter-raids between them. The curious absence of Estonian Vikings from Western pop culture is speculated to be due to Estonia being hidden behind the Iron Curtain at a time when popular conceptions of Vikings were being formed. The Viking Age ended as bigger kingdoms and better fortifications rendered the risk-benefit ratio of raiding into the negative. The Estonians went back to farming, fishing, and most importantly trading with all other Baltic cities in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, which they reached through a network of rivers. It was then when catastrophe hit. A missionary had come to Livonia, which is just south of Estonia, and had converted some people, including a chief. So now the new Christians didn't seem to be under any real risk, but they did live in a sea of pagans. And I suppose for the Pope, he might have thought that it would have been irresponsible to have not called the crusade to protect the new Christians by essentially killing all their neighbors. So waves and waves of crusaders came. They had great difficulty, but they did eventually succeed and managed to subjugate the Balkan peoples, including the Estonians. The next period has been referred to as the 700-year Night of Slavery. The Crusader group that finally won over and exhausted Estonian people was a Germanic group that became the landowning lords of Estonia and would become referred to as the Baltic Germans. The slavery was one of feudalism. The Baltic Germans owned the land and owned the people that worked on the land. When someone sold property, the serfs came with it. Periodic revolts happened and were bloodily suppressed. Invading regional powers like the Poles, Danes, Swedes, and Russians found the social structure useful and did little to change it. Perhaps because of their remote location, feudalism ended finally in the 19th century for Estonia, far later than it did in Western Europe. The newly freed Estonians quickly started moving into the cities where they could educate their children and hope for a future.
Estonia was controlled by the Russian Empire at the time that the Bolshevik Revolution started. They found themselves in a power vacuum and quickly declared independence. And then, in a remarkable chain of events, under an exceptional general, went on to defeat both the Russians and a Baltic German militia, allowing them to create an independent nation.
It's a little hard to exaggerate the significance of that. These are people that had been free for millennia, and in the but then at 1200 they lost it and never could get it back. Every invading power that ever came after the Crusade found the social structure that the Baltic Germans had set up to be a convenient structure for them, and as a result, they were forever enslaved. And just at that moment of time, a power vacuum happened. Estonians grabbed it and declared independence and managed to keep it for the next 20 years.
However, their bad luck was that independence was the 20 years before World War II. When World War II struck, they were caught in the middle between Russia and Germany. Between 1940 and 1945, the population of Estonia dropped by about a quarter. When it was over, a much traumatized Estonia was annexed into the Soviet Union. The result was another 50-year night of slavery. While they had been forced by sword and fire into Christendom, now they were being forced by gun and gulag into a wholly different culture. Finally, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Estonia managed once again to declare independence, and they never looked back.
It's a rough history. A tough people trying to survive in a nasty neighborhood. But I think it gives us the keys as to how a prehistoric animistic tradition can survive into the present day. It gives us some clues.
This is what they call a mois, a Baltic German manor. They're all over Estonia. There are literally hundreds of them. Every village seems to have one. They're, sometimes they're private residences, sometimes they're hotels.
And of course, these are everywhere too, signs of the Soviet occupation. Some are more offensive than others.
This one is called the Bronze Soldier, and there have been riots over the placement of this statue. The reason why it stands requires its own video. But here's where Estonian traditional beliefs came in. Neither of the occupiers spoke Estonian. The one spoke German, the one spoke Russian. Essentially, yes, they used local Estonians to spy on other local Estonians, but that disconnect was enough so that the Estonians could hang on and guard their local traditional beliefs. The Russians perhaps were not that interested in keeping them from having religious beliefs as much as they were concerned about the potential of coalescing a national idea around their religions. And that is the other angle to all this. The nation of Estonia had to arise to survive, and those early nationalists were aware that this was a layer. Maoist was a layer that they could use in order to create and leverage that national identity.
Do I exaggerate when I speak of national survival? Not really. The Livonians, a national group closely related to the Estonians, are virtually extinct as a culture. They were to the south in present-day Latvia. The Ingrians, another related people, were to the east and were the local people around St. Petersburg. They still exist, but they are now a much smaller group and mostly live in exile. This is a rough neighborhood for an ethnic minority, and cultural survival is not guaranteed. When the Estonian scholars started studying Maoist, they were trying to save a nation.
So what do we know about Maoist? Perhaps it is most useful to compare it to monotheism. Monotheism is all about how you interact with other people and is pretty much agnostic as to how you interact with nature, whereas Maoist is all about your interactions with nature.
It's not so different from other indigenous cultures. The balance. They are keeping the balance. You don't take anything that's not yours.
Okay, Maoist is not entirely agnostic with how you deal with other people, but the emphasis is on what you do in the forest is everyone's business, whereas what you do at home is your own. Monotheism is about complex social structures, whereas Maoist is about living intimately with nature.
So usually when I go to the forest, I announce like, I am coming. You know, like asking a permission, because there are creatures whose home it is, and I come to their territory.
In many ways, it's easier to say what we don't know about Mausk. It's not doctrinary and doesn't have a written immutable code, so it tends to vary across distance and time. For example, different villages will have different traditions, and even different generations of the same village will have different traditions.
For all the lack of concrete doctrine in Mausk, there is a pervading sense of humility before nature. And I have to say that there are plenty sacred sites that are as beautiful and spiritual as any of the medieval cathedrals around Europe.
It doesn't matter nationality, the area, whatever, but being in balance with the nature.
The important thing to remember is that the villagers got their sustenance from the forest and the sea. This close to the Arctic Circle, if you're depending on nature, it can be very risky. Sometimes hunting was good and weather was good and the village thrived. Other times, disaster and starvation seemed to be right around the corner. Mausk was a way to make sense of nature and to show it respect. Somehow villagers needed to live in the forest and kill and eat animals without angering the spirits that guarded those animals.
As the other natives, nothing was lost from the animal. Everything was used. And also, when the animal was killed, also you showed the respect. And so,
elaborate word, thought, and action taboos were respected toward that end. Every species of animal and fish had their own ruler, and that ruler had to be shown respect through showing respect to their subjects. No animal would be left injured, no part of the carcass wasted. Sacrifices would be left on sacred rocks, and the bones of the animals killed would be buried, perhaps in sacred groves. So the obvious question then becomes, what is Mouse to the modern Estonian? I think obviously it no longer has that practical element, but I believe it's evolved to be about devotion now. There's a phrase in Estonian, bread is older than we are. It's an admonition to respect those things that came from long before you were born, those elements of culture that you were born into. So honor, devotion, and love of nature. There's plenty the modern world could learn from Mausk. It's hard to call it luck that a combination of oppression, centuries-long oppression by people that don't speak your language, and the ongoing threat of extinction of your entire culture would shape Estonians' worldview, unless you meant bad luck. But that, well, may be the combination that gave Estonia one of its most fascinating birthrights, a living, ongoing, animistic belief system that reaches all the way back into prehistory.
Once you see that connection, then the results of the poll that I talked about religious beliefs, Christianity and atheism, and early pagan beliefs are not so mysterious. This is a people that survived slavery in a form of cultural genocide and fought through it all to retain their sense of national unity. The country now thrives in the 21st century as one of the most successful of the former Soviet republics. An ancient religious belief system like Maoist may well not have been the only factor that played a part in their independence, but its centrality really can't be denied.